Hey, how you doing? And welcome to Livewire's Views from the Top, our series dedicated to bringing you the best ideas and insights from those at the top of their game. I'm Ali Selby, and today I'm really excited to be sitting down with Bianca Ogden, who is the Portfolio Manager of Platinum's International Health Sciences Fund. I haven't spoken with Bianca for a few years now, but last time I learned so much about the innovations happening in biotech and health sciences. And with the emergence of AI this year, I'm really excited to learn about the developments happening in the space, and I hope you are too. Thanks so much for joining us today, Bianca.
That's great. Thanks for having me. Really looking forward to it.
Before we begin, I feel like it's really important to note that you have a very different background to most fund managers. You started your career as a scientist at Johnson & Johnson and Novartis. You actually have a PhD in virology as well. Why do you think that experience is important when it comes to investing in health sciences and biotech companies?
Yeah, look, I think the importance for it is not so much a PhD really, that's more the science and you write something up. It's really seeing how a drug is being developed, and there's so many different areas that you have to focus on when you develop a drug that when I worked at the pharmaceutical companies, I saw that firsthand. So you always have to have a champion for that particular drug that someone or target that someone is developing, and without that often something gets kind of lost in the ether. So from my experience and what I've gathered over the years is that I really understand the timelines and what it really takes to get something to a commercial stage.
Back when we last spoke, which was in 2021, we were all in lockdowns. I remember interviewing you over Zoom. We talked about how the world would have to live with COVID-19, which in retrospect is completely on the money. Has anything surprised you in the way that the virus and its respective vaccines have developed over the last few years, particularly with the Aussie government's recent COVID-19 inquiry? Are we now out of the COVID-19 woods?
I don't think we're out of the woods. I think it could emerge any time, and I think we're a bit more vigilant overall the world. So we read a lot more about the next flu strain that's coming up, or you see animals that have viruses that jump to humans once in a while. There's a lot been happening about the Marburg virus in Africa. So I think we're more vigilant. I think in COVID or for the coronavirus, I think we have learned to live with it. There's different versions coming up each year. Vaccines change to do that, which is great. What surprised me was the obsession with biotech, that people got so excited and you got valuations went out of control and people thought, wow, we can develop drugs very quickly now and it's just magic. That's not the case. And I think what we've learned there is biotech is difficult and it really requires a lot of dedication and persistence to get something to market.
It's definitely been a difficult few years for healthcare companies. How do you invest? How do you identify opportunities?
Yeah, so one of the key things that I do, I look for trends. I look for, so I'm a long-term investor, and by long-term I mean it's not weeks, it's actually months or years, and that's what it takes to get a new product to market that really changes the standard of care. So what I look for is what happens in the disease, what does a doctor or a patient actually require, where are the loopholes, and then on top of that I basically stay quite close to the industry and really understand, well, what are they working on? Where's funding going to go to? And we've seen for the last 20 years that there's a lot of work happening in the radiotherapy space. While a lot of people today think, oh, this is a new area. Well, we invested in that 20 years ago in a company called Corixa. And to us, we stayed very close in recent years and we saw a lot of funding flow into private companies in that space. And that's how we then invest alongside those kind of investments that are going on. So it is really about the trend. It is about understanding diseases and really understanding what does the end customer, the patient or the doctor, really need to really change the progression of a disease or ultimately cure it.
How important is, I guess, the stage of the life cycle? Obviously, biotech and healthcare companies go through this life cycle.
Yeah.
Where is the best risk reward?
So the best risk reward is when you get in really early and you discover, for example, a new target and you build the science around it, you invest in that and go all the way along.
Is that before trials?
Yeah, so that's before clinical trials. So if you really get in early and you do it very efficiently, you will make a lot of money out of that. We don't really pay attention to where we go. We really look at what is an exciting target, for example? What is an exciting area? And then we look at the teams around that, who's working on that, what's the data that they have, preclinical, clinical, and what's the plan to really develop it and ultimately commercialize it. And then overall, we look at valuation and say like, okay, so how much do you think you're worth on that? And sometimes people say a number to you and you're like, oh my, that's crazy. And sometimes you're like, wow, that's really good. And these days, there's a lot of great opportunities because we're coming out of this, I guess, biotech winter, if you can call it that way. And that's kind of where we get really excited, when everything of those little pieces fall into place and we then really go and start our position. But it doesn't stop with that. So over time, we will get more opportunities because there's usually challenges and some setbacks, but these are then the opportunities to either double your position or to say, look, hasn't really played out that hypothesis, maybe we need to move on. But it's a journey that we really go on with when we invest.
Do you often invest like post-approval, or are the returns not as great post that period?
We do invest post-approval. We do invest and have a look at it, and then it comes a lot more, valuation comes a lot more into play to understand what is it that, other investors are missing, what are we seeing, and that presents opportunities that we can invest in. But it is sometimes, I think the investment case often has played out a lot more than when you get earlier. And there's a different risk reward, obviously, in that. But when you have a portfolio, you try and structure that in a certain way. So we invested in Sanofi, for example. It's a big company, but it is a company that is going through a little bit of R&D change to be a lot more sophisticated in what they do and a lot more innovative.
The two biggest subjects of the year have really been AI and interest rates of inflation together. With interest rates now heading southwards, what's the outlook for funding, and what does that mean for health sciences and biotech companies?
I think what you see is in terms of funding, that's kind of has evolved quite a bit. So we saw quite a very difficult time where companies couldn't really access funding. What we're seeing today is a lot more targeted investments, but a lot more money going per company, for example, if you look at the private space. We've seen IPOs now slowly coming to market in the US. There was a day, I think it was in September, where 3 IPOs were very successful in one day in the US. So that was very good to see. We're seeing a lot more secondary investments. So overall, it's a healthy environment. But again, it comes down to if you have a good product, good clinical data, you will get money. But it is really exciting in that how it has evolved, the dynamic has changed. It's a much more healthier environment. Before it was like any project got funding, and today it's much more selective, and usually that will generate much better mature companies that are out there.
I feel like I'm often told by fund managers that investors should focus on the things that they know, invest in what you know. I'm going to assume that most people haven't done a science degree or a medicine degree or aren't working in a biotechnology company. Are there any cheat signals that you think could help investors identify opportunities in this space?
I don't think there's cheat signals. I think some people say, okay, look at the shareholder register, and if there's some really important investors on there, that's kind of a bulletproof. But I have to say, people that have done this for years, like me, we get things wrong or things just don't work out. So overall, I think it's important to look at the people that are in these companies, because in the end, companies are run by people, not by spreadsheets. And often it's interesting to see what have these people done before, where have they kind of discovered challenges or had to overcome challenges, and then see how they have dug themselves out a hole. That's probably something I pay a lot of attention to. Is that a cheat signal? I don't know, but unfortunately, sometimes you get lucky and you think, oh, I found that great signal that I can use everywhere, and then next time it doesn't work. So I haven't found it, so I'm happy to, if someone has, please let me know.
How about red flags? Are there any red flags that you think investors can look out for so they miss some of those bad companies that could be out there, the Theranoses of the world?
Yeah. So I think one of my kind of pet hate things when someone says is, oh, XYZ is de-risked. Usually that's not the case in this space, and there's never really a de-risked product out there. There's maybe slightly less risk, but I think when someone says de-risk, I always think like, what's happening here? There is also, I think, when companies cut corners, they say, oh, we're jumping from phase 1 straight to phase 3. And you're like, oh, hold on a second, what do you do? So there's certain things, certain people where you just say, I'm not quite sure I trust that. And when they say, oh, we can, we're the leader in XYZ, I always get a bit worried because not everyone is a leader in it, but everyone tells you. So I pay a bit of closer attention to that then.
Is there any company that comes to mind that kind of brings that to life? A little bit of a challenge.
I think there's lots of companies that tell you they're the leaders, and then you go over and say, oh, hold on a second, but who is that one? And the other thing that's actually quite interesting is when people say badmouth other companies. That's where you kind of think like, well, why do you need to do that? That's kind of where I get a bit worried, because it's like a good company shouldn't be able to do that. But there's nothing on the top of my mind that now says, oh, they're really bad or really red flags. It's a puzzle piece that you have to put together.
Okay, let's talk about some of the big picture themes now. I talked about artificial intelligence in the intro. It's obviously taken the world completely by storm. How is it transforming health sciences today?
So we've got a couple of investments in the space, particular on the drug discovery side and probably more on the small molecule biologic side on that. To be honest, some of those investments haven't been that great. Not that the companies haven't performed, but it takes a lot of money and dedication to really reinvent how you do drug discovery. And to me, the concept of you press a button and a new drug comes out and it magically works really well is not possible. I think there's little bits and pieces where you can use AI as a tool to make your life easier and maybe cut down time and cost. That's where I find it quite interesting. There's obviously in imaging, you could use the AI that really reads images because that's, I think, where AI is today much easier, or machine learning is much easier to use. We've done a lot of work in the protein side of things, so how proteins fold and how you can predict the protein target interaction. We had an investment in a vaccine company actually called Icosavax. The technology comes out of David Baker's lab that just basically he won the Nobel Prize for how you use computers to predict folding of proteins. And that technology was used at Icosavax to basically come up with new vaccines for COVID, but also for RSV and other viruses. And that was very interesting because the company wasn't seen as an AI play, but it was behind that. They really used machine learning to do it. So they now has been acquired by AstraZeneca. But it's those little things and pieces that happen in the background where basically scientists use it as a tool to progress more quality work. And we do like the work that Recursion is doing in terms of imaging. So they have these lines of robots lined up that basically image cells, and the cells basically, or the pathways inside the cells have been manipulated genetically, and then they take slices of the image and see how the cell changes and how things change it, whether you can find ways of targeting different diseases. Wow. And all of that data is very important. And to be honest, in the space of healthcare or drug development, data is the key in AI, to really generate quality data that is consistent how you do it. And I think we're at that stage at the moment, and then we go later to use machine learning and then get better at predicting pathways or diseases. So it is fascinating, but it's really at the early stages. So we had two companies, Recursion and Excense, they are merging at the moment to then really go 2 steps back to get several steps forward. And it's exciting, but it takes a lot of patience to get there really as an investor.
My cousin's actually an oncologist, and he said they're working on really exciting trials right now that we could see some deaths from cancers, like lung cancer, for example, significantly reduce. Around 40% of people will be diagnosed with cancer in their lifetimes, which is a crazy stat. I feel like every family has had some experience of cancer in their lifetime. What innovations are you seeing in the oncology space? Yeah. And are there any companies that you're really liking right now?
So a lot of money has flown into oncology. It's exciting what happened there with immune therapy. We're still struggling to get to the next level of immune oncology because we have certain targets that work very well, but others we are struggling to say there's another checkpoint. It's the data isn't as clean as we probably want it to be. It's competitive, as I said, because of the money that has flown into it. And there's a little bit from investors, like fatigue, saying like, oh my God, I don't know how this company differentiates over this, and I don't know anymore how to really read the results of that. There's cell therapy that is exciting, but quite difficult to bring to the masses, really. I am very excited about something called bispecific antibodies or multispecific. So these are molecules that are biologics that you inject that can go after different targets at the same time. And on top of that, they can recruit the immune system into the tumor and destroy it. And it's a very kind of these multifunctional molecules, and that is really starting to show some signs of positive results. And side effect has always been an issue to watch for, but it is something that we're seeing pharma companies acquire and really add to it. And we're seeing the same modality, so these are kind of the way how these molecules look like, for inflammatory diseases. It's these multifunctional proteins or antibodies that really could make a difference and really hit things at the same time, because all these diseases are multifactorial. So you need to always do different things. And if you could do that in one molecule, that would be great. And on top of that, what we're also seeing is that you don't have to take them all the time. We now come up with technologies, engineering of these molecules that hang around in the body longer. So you may just have to take it every 6 months. And that's really exciting. There's different engineering capabilities that are happening now that I find really exciting.
Are there any companies?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about that. I'm just thinking about, so we've got a company called Merus. It's a European company, but listed in the US, that is in head and neck space with one of these multi-specific kind of assets. Just trying to think of the top of my head. There's various in the inflammatory disease, probably you've got a company called Apogee that has a molecule that you may just have, which is more inflammatory disease, but that a molecule that you may just have to take every 3 to 6 months for atopic dermatitis, for example. So we've got several of them. We're watching some very carefully. There's a lot happening in the private market on that, but it is a fascinating area that has a chance to really go against the cell therapy and make it much easier to kind of administer. Cell therapies means you get your cells, modify them, and then give it back to the patient. It's cumbersome. Things getting easier, but it's not as easy with the other one. With the multi-specific, you can basically, it's like a normal product that you inject, so you don't have this other lab step in there. But that's exciting.
It is interesting that you say, I feel like so much money has been invested or donated to charities or science firms or whatever it may, research for cancer, but then we've seen cancer rates continue to tick up. Yeah. Are we doing enough to, I guess, solve the cancer problem?
I think we're doing a lot, but I think sometimes there is these lulls where we have to evolve the science behind it, and then you get another step change. And I think we are getting there. We have, if we look at the checkpoint inhibitors, particular PD-1, PD-L1, they were approved about more than a decade ago, and we've been struggling to find the next layer of that. And I think we're getting there now. So we've had some data recently on these bispecifics, and I think we are at that point. So it just takes a little while. It's funny because you need the money to do it, but then it takes about 5 to 10 years to get to the next step change. So I think we're there. But I think we're doing a lot in cancer. I think there's other diseases where we probably should do a lot more, like neurodegenerative diseases. Alzheimer's, we're still not there yet. Parkinson's, all sorts of diseases. I think it's probably more interesting to really focus on that and really foster that. It's more complex, but I think it's important because it's very big diseases. Obesity we now have, so.
Yeah, 100%. And devastating as well.
Yes,
with Alzheimer's.
exactly, 100%.
Are there any companies that are really exploring that area right now that you're invested in?
It's a company called Wave Life Sciences that just recently had some data in with something called RNA editing for the first time in humans, where it's not your normal gene editing, it's more on the transcript that gets written for these proteins that they can edit and change. So far, it's not in neurodegenerative diseases, but there are others. There's a Belgian company, Procure, that's going into Reds, for example. So there are companies around that do that with new ways of doing things. But we're seeing that left, right and centre, there's little pockets that really come up, which is exciting.
Are there any Aussie companies that you think are really exciting today? I feel like we have some major health companies in Australia, like CSL, which is one of the biggest companies on the ASX. Are there any hidden opportunities that you're seeing on the Aussie market?
Yeah, the Aussie market's always interesting. We follow it, but sometimes it's very frustrating. But we have one company that we recently added to the portfolio, and it's actually a device company called Imricor. And what they do is they do MRI-guided ablation. So if your heart is out of sync and just doesn't tick the way you want it to be, what usually has to happen is people have to go into your heart and then basically do these ablation procedures. And it's usually done under X-ray, but you can't really see everything. So sometimes I think the doctors go a little bit blind and they'll try their luck and then it may not work. You're fine, but over time it comes back. So you really want a modality or an imaging modality that really shows you, for example, the muscle, the different tissues in there. An MRI can do that, but you have to then do the catheters that go in the way that you work that together. And this company is working on that. And it's really gradually expanding its user base, really, and also, I guess, gets regulatory approvals for that. So that's quite exciting. My dad has atrial fibrillation, and so through him, I've learned how they start off with just shocking your heart and see whether it's okay, and then 2 days later, it's back to where it was before, and so you've got to do the next procedure. So I've done a bit of personal research into it, and I kind of really realized, like, wow, there's really a need to get this modality, there's imaging out there, and to really combine it with that. And Imricor is kind of doing that. And it sits a bit under the radar screen. They raised some money recently, did a decent job at it. So I'm quite excited for them.
You said before, I'm not sure what word you used, I think it's frustrating or something that Australian healthcare companies. Why is that?
Look, it's frustrating because I don't think we have the right investor base at times to really understand that when a company is listed on a stock exchange, that's kind of the first phase of their new chapter. And ultimately, particularly in the therapeutic space, they will need more money. And if you're an investor, you should be long-term and you should be able to give more money along the journey rather than just look for a catalyst. People find they do that, but we don't really have enough people that really want to support that and build that. So if you go in the US, there's several funds, not as many either, but there is a very dedicated fund that really will invest along the way at different raises. And we just don't have that. So if you then look at companies locally, how much time they have to spend to find more investors, it's very inefficient because the management team should focus on running the business rather than continuously trying to raise their $5-10 million. And so I find that frustrating because we have very good science, but we can't do the speed that a US company can. Like, so you've got companies there that, they raise 300 million. We've got one at the moment that's raising 300 million within 2 days to do commercialization. And that I find that frustrating how you do that. So we've got one at the moment, I think, that's also raising locally. And they are raising money to accelerate the next step, what they want to do. But they won't be able to raise the 50 million that may require. So that's what I find frustrating. So I often give it to other peers in the US and say, go have a look at it. But they have so much in their own backyard that it's hard to do.
Okay, last question for today. We always ask our guests for a unique learning after years in the market, something that you feel like you wouldn't have known if it weren't for the position you are in today. What is your unique view from the top?
One of the key things I've learned is there's science, but the big part to it is the people and its leadership. And often it is a leadership that knows how to make decisions. And I've learned that probably with Moderna, with the interactions that we had with Stefan Bancel there, is they made the tough decisions that we're going to go and make this vaccine for COVID or for coronavirus. And it's the speed of decision, it's the leadership that's required that will get you to the end. And it's the people that raise enough money to actually give them the opportunity to do it. And I see it over and over again that it's the people and the leaders in the businesses that that often make or break it. And it's teams, so I often pay close attention to teams that have been successful, that made the right decisions, and back them. And I think that's so key in all of that. And I've underestimated that earlier in my career, where you think science is all of it. No, it's actually what the leaders do with that science and translate it that really makes a difference.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Bianca. I really enjoyed this discussion. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your ideas and insights with our audience.
That's great. Thank you very much for having me.
If you enjoyed that too, don't forget to subscribe to Livewire's YouTube channel. We're adding so much great content just like this every single week.